All right. Welcome back. We are going to continue our discussion today about the Great Depression. We had left off talking about the bonus army marchers. Uh, Today we're going to start to talk about what the rural life was like during the Great Depression. Well, one of the things that has happened to people who live out in the countryside is that they're starting to lose their farms because of overproduction during World War One. Remember, during World War One, America fed most of Western Europe, right? The British and French soldiers, they weren't farming; they were fighting, and so America had to produce all of the food for not only for American civilians to eat, but the American soldiers to eat, for the British civilians to eat, and the British soldiers to eat, and the French civilians and the French soldiers, right? So we were feeding, essentially three countries worth of people, and for our farmers to be able to do that, they had to produce more. And so the thing about producing crops is you can't just produce more. It doesn't work that way, right? If you want to produce more corn, you have to have more land and more equipment to be able to do that. And so the government essentially went into these small farmers and said, "Look, we need your help feeding all these people. You're going to make a boatload of money. We need you to produce more." And the farmers went out and did what they were asked to do. They bought more land and they bought more equipment to farm that land. And to be able to do that, they had to take out loans. And everything was great during the war. They were making all kinds of money. They were paying off those loans, but then the war ended. And when the war ended, British and French soldiers went back to farming. And so all of a sudden now they're not buying American products as much. And so we're growing all this food. There's not enough people to buy it. So the prices plummet. And these farmers are in a situation where they can't pay back their loans. And so we're going to see 400,000 farmers be foreclosed upon. And foreclosure just means that the bank comes in and takes your collateral, it takes your farm from you if you can't pay back your debts. And so, millions of, I said hundreds of thousands of farmers are going to lose everything here. The remaining farmers then do exactly the opposite thing for what they should do to be able to get prices back up. And I don't mean to be critical of farmers here, because as they as prices drop, they still have bills to pay. Your average farmer's got to, he's got to pay his mortgage. He's got to put food on the table. He's got to pay off his, the loans he has on his equipment. And so when prices drop for the average farmer, that means I have to grow more food to be able to pay back these bills. But as they grow more food, right, we are overproducing even more, and then prices drop again. And so we're caught in this kind of like vicious cycle of every time prices drop, farmers feel like they have to sell more to make the same amount of money to pay their debts, which causes prices to drop again, which means more and more and more farming. And so we're not only are we tanking prices, which is destroying farmers' ability to be able to make a living, we're also tilling up the soil too much. And so, every time we plant crops, you got to till up the soil, and the soil loses a little bit of its nutrients. And every time we, till up the soil becomes a little bit looser and a little bit looser. And that's going to have devastating consequences for farmers and really for everybody. And so, a lot of these farmers, when they lose their farm, they're forced into tenant farming. So they essentially have to farm for somebody else. Think of it as like a less nasty version of sharecropping, right? You do all the work and the landowner gives you a share of the profits. It's not an ideal situation for most of these farmers. Thousands of them are going to head west, mostly to California. There's this belief that there are jobs in California. And so people are going to start to head in that direction. A lot of these migrants that head out there are coming from Oklahoma, and they're referred to as Okies. Okies from Oklahoma. That's a derogatory term, kind of, referring to these, like, you know, rubes from the countryside, these failed farmers that are putting a burden on the California economy. I mean, just like any kind of, derogatory term like that, it's not really fair to the people that it's happening to. Um, and then to add insult to injury, we're going to see the largest man-made ecological disaster in history happen. And I mean that the Dust Bowl is the largest man-made ecological disaster in history. And it's not entirely man's fault, right? We have over farmed, and so we've torn up all the prairie grass in the Midwest. The prairie grass had a very intense root structure that kept the soil in the ground. It kept the nutrients in the ground. We tore all of that up, and then we plowed and plowed and plowed and plowed. And every time we plowed, the dirt got a little bit finer, and the more crops that we grew, the more nutrients that were being sucked out of the soil. Most farmers, because they're trying to make money, they're not leaving their fields fallow, which is, every once in a while farmers just take time off. They don't actually farm. Maybe they plant alfalfa or something in the field, let it just kind of naturally die to put the nutrients back in the ground. Farmers weren't doing that. And so, what we see is that the soil is becoming finer and finer, and it's not it's not a very stable situation. And then a drought hits, and so as the rain stops, the soil dries up even more, and that's going to lead to these gigantic windstorms all across the country. So the Dust Bowl is going to be the result of a combination of overproduction and then the droughts, the bad weather. Right. Many of these farmers, this is just going to be absolutely devastating for them. They're going to essentially lose everything because of the Dust Bowl. It's really going to kind of change the way American farmers are going to farm. There's two things that are going to need to be done here to solve these problems. The first is we're going to have to change the way we farm. During the Great Depression, when FDR takes over, he's going to pump a bunch of money into a lot of the local state universities through the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and we're going to study how to keep this from happening. One is we have to leave our fields fallow every once in a while. Another thing that's going to be important is we need to plant more trees around our farms. Those trees will have root systems that'll help hold the dirt in, but it'll also cut the wind to keep these huge dust storms from happening. And when I say huge dust storms, imagine the biggest dust storm you can ever imagine in your mind, and you're not even close to how big these dust storms can be. We see the region here that gets affected the most when we take a look at this map. Right in the center, in the Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas region, that red region right there, that area is going to kind of be the hotbed, but all of that yellow area there is affected. We see the soil has dried up, and these windstorms are going to create gusts of wind that are going to carry dirt from that center part of the country all the way over to eastern cities like Boston. So when I told you to imagine a dust storm, I bet you didn't imagine anything like that. This is what we're talking about here. This is going to leave utter devastation. These dust storms are, going to be miles long. They're going to dwarf houses. and they're going to be sweeping all across the country. And so, what this is going to do is a couple things. One, you're not going to be able to farm anything in conditions like this. The soil is too dry, so your corn, your wheat, all that stuff's dead. But then, as these storms come through, it's also going to take out livestock. And so, if you're a cattle rancher, well, a cow's probably big enough that, these dust storms, they might not like suffocate because of these dust storms, although some will. What's going to happen with these dust storms is as they pass through and you've got your pinned in cattle, the dust settles, as it blows, it settles up next to things that it hits. And so gigantic mounds will be created over the fences. And so the cows that survive, when the storm is over, they just like wander right over the little fence and then wander off. And so, just pigs, cows, chickens, all those things are going to just be, devastated. And so we're going to see cars being buried, as you're driving and one of these storms hits, it's a rush to get into your home or to get covered up. We know that as these dust storms come, it's really scary because there's a lot of static electricity in them, and which scares a lot of people, but things get absolutely covered. Women are really going to struggle with this. Remember, we're still living with the vestiges of the cult of domesticity, right? And so a woman's identity is caught up in how well she keeps her home. Well, in the pictures here on the bottom, that's a house buried under dirt. How clean is that home? It's not. People are forced, men, women, children are forced to live in a situation where, when you eat food, it has dirt in it, right? I mean, if you're eating your morning bowl of cereal, there's dirt in your cereal and you just have to eat it. You don't have another option. It's in your bed, it's in your shoes, it's always on you. You can't keep your house swept well enough. I mean, the dirt finds its way in everywhere. You start to see like right now, I live in the Midwest, and if you were to look at my cabinet right now, you would see all of my cups in my cupboard are upside down in my cupboard. Well, that doesn't make sense. I want you to think about the last time that you actually got into your cupboard and cleaned it and disinfected it. You probably have never done that. So why in the world would you take your cup into your cabinet and then put it on a surface that the entire time you've lived in your house, you've never cleaned, right? And then when you pick it up, you put your lip on the portion of the cup that touched the surface that you've never cleaned. Why would you do that? Well, it's a tradition left over from the Dust Bowl, right? During the Dust Bowl, you had to turn all your stuff upside down because if you didn't, when you went in there to use it, it'd be filled with dirt. And so that's a thing that, we still do to this day. We want to keep dirt out of our cups. We put them upside down. Ew. And do your mother a favor, go in and empty out your cabinets and disinfect that cupboard, and then put your dishes back up there. Your family will appreciate it. And so, the Dust Bowl, it's going to be absolutely deadly for old people and young people, anybody with any kind of respiratory illness. You're just going to have to be breathing in this stuff. And so, again, this is just evidence for why the Great Depression is so utterly devastating for Americans. The stock market has crashed. The banks have failed, right? I mean, the people are businesses are laying off their employees, somewhere between 25 and 33% unemployment, across the United States. And then the Dust Bowl, right? I mean, this is just absolutely awful for people. And then when the dust actually dies down and some of the plant life starts to grow back, there's going to be like plagues of locusts that sweep across this portion of the United States. I mean, like, you just can't win. And so we're going to see that a lot of these people are going to head to California. They're going to take everything they have and they're going to start to head, to other places, the majority of which are going to head to California. We can see here in this chart all the different places that people are going to flee to get out of, the hardest hit regions, right? Um, So what we see here is pictures of victims from the Dust Bowl. The picture to the left is probably the most iconic photograph taken during the Dust Bowl, or honestly, the Great Depression. It's Dorothea Lange's migrant mother. This woman is in her 30s, and she has multiple children. Her husband has abandoned her, her and her children. I believe she has 7 children. And she's working as a pea picker. And so Dorothea Lange is eventually going to be hired by FDR as a part of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. It hires artists to go around and kind of document the Great Depression. So we have it for historical purposes, and really, honestly, to employ artists, because during a depression, who are the first people to lose their jobs? It's almost always artists, right? Because it's not a, unfortunately, it's not a thing that society needs to survive. I say that as my sister is a professional modern dancer in New York City, and so arts are definitely an important part of my life and my family's life, but artists definitely struggle in bad economies, and so Dorothea Lange takes this picture of this woman, and I think when we look at her face, one, she's aged older than what she actually is, but I think we can all kind of see her worry and her concern there. She's has to be thinking about how am I going to raise all of these children on my own as a migrant worker, picking peas, just trying to get by. I can't imagine the kind of stress that she's going through, and so just to kind of put a human face on the economic devastation of the Dust Bowl. So families are going to be suffering all across America. Men are going to be leaving home and searching for work. It is the other side of the cult of domesticity, where it's a woman's job to like stay at home and cook and clean, is a man's identity gets wrapped up in his ability to provide. And so most men are going to stick with their families, but they're going to have to travel the country looking for work wherever they can find it and send money home as they can. Some men are going to be so ashamed of their inability to be able to take care of their families that they will actually abandon their wives and kids, with this belief that they're more likely to get charity from their local church if they don't have a husband to provide for them. And, in large part because they're just cowards and run away from a hard problem. Right. So there are going to be transient workers, traveling workers. The group that ends up riding the rails gets known as hobos. The picture here on the right is of men riding the rails, traveling from city to city to find work. Right. They can't afford transportation. So what do? As a train is riding by, run up and try and jump in one of the cars, and it'll take you to the next city, and hopefully you can find work there. And so these hobos end up riding the rails, searching for work and a payday. Right. We're also going to see a spike in suicide numbers. When the stock market crashed, a lot of people in the financial industry are going to commit suicide, literally jumping out the windows of their offices. But as things get more and more desperate, you're going to start to see, men that just feel like failures because of their inability to feed their family, commit suicide. You're going to see the same thing with women as well. Some of the things that happen to women are absolutely tragic. Women are, really, again, because of the cult of domesticity and the social pressure for them to be caregivers, women really feel like if their family is suffering, that it's a personal failure. And so a lot of them won't complain about, not having heat in the winter, not having enough food. And because so much of their identity is wrapped up in their ability to take care of their family, they're going to skip meals so that their kids can eat, or so that their husband can eat. And the belief is the husband needs the food because he's the one going out trying to do this physical labor. And so, some of these women, before they even ask to get help, they're going to be in such bad condition that it's really going to be too late. Women are going to have the hardest time finding work again. There's going to be this belief that we need to save the jobs for the men. And so, if a woman is by herself, her husband has abandoned her, and she, has the kids, it's going to be way more difficult for her to find a job than it would have been for her husband to find a job, right? And so, a lot of these women are really going to suffer, and really, they're because they believe if they complain about it, or if they ask for help, that they're a failure as a woman. That a lot of these tragedies happen when they really could have been avoided. There was help out there that they just, because of societal pressure, didn't feel like they could ask for. So families are going to be struggling. Like I said, many people are going to be homeless. We are going to see an increase in the number of people who go door to door looking for food. We're going to start to see an increase in kind of petty crimes. People stealing food out of gardens or clothes off of clothing lines. We don't really see a gigantic increase in major violent crimes during the Great Depression, or at least I haven't seen any of those numbers, which gives me, a strong faith in humanity, that even as we get really, really desperate, we're not necessarily getting violent. I think as people get more and more desperate, they're more likely to maybe steal or do things of that nature. But for the most part, it's amazing how bad things get, and how much society keeps its order and its structure. God bless humanity for that. Children are going to be really severely impacted. They're not getting enough nutrition right at the time when they need to get nutrition the most. In some parts of the country, we're going to see malnourishment reach like 90%. A lot of that's going to be in the South. The South gets hit pretty hard. Minority children are going to be impacted more than your, white Protestants. School days get shortened. In some areas, school gets canceled altogether because kids are being put out into the workforce, or need to be at home to help take care of even smaller children, or to help around the house. And so what we see is about 3 million kids leave schools. That's going to have a pretty negative long-term effect on the economy. Those 3 million kids need to be in school for two very important economic reasons. One, kids get paid less than adults. So if they're leaving school to go find jobs, right? We don't really want that during the Great Depression. We want their dads to have those jobs because their dads have more experience. They're older, and they're probably going to be able to demand more money, which means more money for the entire family. So we actually kind of want fewer kids in the workforce. And the second reason, and this is an important one, more long term, is we need kids in school because we need them to become skilled workers. If 3 million kids aren't in school, of those 3 million kids, I mean, how many of them would have been future doctors or engineers or accountants. Society needs those people, and if they're not in school, some of them will go back to school. I imagine a lot of them go back to school, but we definitely don't want to put obstacles in the way of people learning a skill, because not only do they benefit from learning a skill that allows them to get paid more, but society benefits from that too. You would hate to discourage the future doctor that's going to cure cancer from going to school. We want them there. We want as many talented people learning as many skills as possible. Not just because they make more money having learned those skills, but because society benefits from their innovation once they have those skills. And so, we're going to attempt to fix that problem later with the National Youth Administration during the FDR's administration, where he pushes kids out of full-time work and into part-time work, kind of in a system that we have today. Right. Right. A lot of these kids are going to end up working, like I said before, for not a lot of money. These like sweatshop condition factories are going to pay next to nothing. They probably pay their fathers more, and then some kids are going to become voluntarily homeless. Right. So if you were, what we know is that there were kids that are like, 10, 11, 12 years old that look around and see that mom and dad can't afford to feed all the kids. And that if you're, 10 or 11 and you're the oldest kid at home, you're just another mouth to feed, and you're probably the most likely to make it on your own. And so these kids will just like run off. So their parents don't have to pay for food for them. And so a lot of them will go, work on neighboring farms and live on those farms, 5 days a week, come home on the weekend. So they're not like necessarily technically all the time homeless. Like if they get in trouble, they can end up going back home to their parents, or if they, can't find work, they can always go back home. But they're going to want to leave so they're not a burden. And so, they might just go work on a neighbor's farm if the farm is surviving the Dust Bowl, or do odds and ends jobs for, the local hardware store. And maybe they don't get paid in money, but they get paid in a place to sleep and, a couple of meals a day. And, even though they might not be making money at all, or just a little bit of money, at least their parents don't have to pay for their food. I can't imagine being that age, even the older ones, 15, 16 years old, and having to make that kind of sacrifice so your parents can feed your littler brothers and sisters. It's just, I just don't think they make human beings that tough anymore. Right. We're going to see about 250,000 homeless youth at this time. Right. It's just it's a hard life, particularly for these children. All right. So in conclusion, pretty much everybody is affected by the Depression. Doesn't matter if you're a banker, a stockbroker, a factory worker or owner, farmer, doesn't matter. Pretty much every aspect of our economy is suffering in a major way, right? The poor are going to get hit the hardest. They're going to have fewer savings. They're going to have, less help. Less ability to switch careers, fewer options. It's just, it's devastating for the poor. Government assistance will be minimal. Herbert Hoover is president. He really believes that it is not the government's role to provide handouts, that's just going to make people dependent, that they need to, be self-sufficient. And so, any kind of help that you're getting from society is going to just be from the generosity of your neighbors or from the local church, maybe the local government, but the federal government is not taking a large enough role. I say that, but over the course of the next couple lessons, we are going to, give Hoover at least some credit. He will do more than any other previous president to intervene in the economy. It's just because of his natural laissez-faire philosophy, it just won't be nearly enough to keep people alive through the Depression. I should say not alive, but alive and flourishing through the Depression. Right. America is feeling an increasing sense of depression and anxiety because of these economic circumstances. We had never experienced anything like this before, and people are afraid, and they need strong leadership to try and see them through. All right. That, my friends, is where we will leave off for the day. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And I will see you again tomorrow.